The first thing I heard on that mountain wasn't birdsong or wind moving through the pine tops. It was a voice with a badge built into it. "This house belongs to the community," she announced, as if she'd been elected sheriff of the slopes and I'd missed a vote. I still had the keys clenched in my hand, the brass cold against my palm, still breathing in the chalky scent of dust and dry wood from a place that hadn't been lived in for 3 years. I just bought it, fair, clean by the book, and I was already being told it wasn't mine. A stranger with a smile, like a posted notice. "I'm Noah Turner, a freelance documentary filmmaker. I bought the mountain house after a long inheritance dispute left it empty and forgotten. It's tucked into 2 steep acres of old-growth pines, the kind of solitude creative work craves." I could already see it in my head. Cameras on the north wall of the main room, cables disciplined along baseboards, an edit station pointed at a window that frames a valley like a cinema screen. I wasn't running from the city so much as making room for thought. No traffic, no endless notifications, no neon competing with stars. Just quiet, the kind that gives shape to a story. My habit, forged on assignment in places where trouble arrives without knocking, is to document first and improvise second. Before I unpack my monitors, I walked the property with a toolkit and a map I'd sketched from the survey. I mounted high-resolution security cameras at every access point. The switchback driveway, the slope that opens to the service road, the gravel spur the previous owners used during renovations. Lenses set to cover angles the way a DP covers a set, overlap, and redundancy. Motion alerts tuned to mountain life, not squirrels. It's an old habit and a good one. Preparation prevents the kinds of problems that lawyers and insurance adjusters like to explain after the fact. The bones of the house are solid. It needs everything. Foundation work, modern wiring, new plumbing. But the frame is true and the footprint makes sense. You can feel when a place wants to be lived in again. You can also feel when you're not alone. I heard the van before I saw it. Engine noise travels fast in the thin mountain air. The sound rose from the road, grew louder past the bend, and flattened into my gate. A white wellness vehicle with official-looking decals glided to a stop, parking perpendicular to the entrance, so cleanly it cut off the drive like a barricade. The headlights pointed right at my nearest camera, a rinse of glare that would blow out the image and blind the sensor for any motion event. That told me more than the decals did. Someone understood cameras. She stepped out wearing a crisp blazer and a badge pinned to her lapel that introduced her as the compliance chair of our mountain HOA. Darlene Pierce. The nameplate shined. The posture said she'd gotten her way often enough to mistake that for law. She smiled the kind of smile public officials pull on when they need you to agree before they tell you why. She had a clipboard in one hand, a phone in the other, and a voice that had practiced being certain. "You must be the new owner," she said, like the words granted me temporary dignity. "I'm the HOA compliance chair for this community. I need to discuss our state partnership program regarding your property and its role in emergency community services." She held up her phone. A QR code glowed on the screen. The header on the form it pointed to Read Compassion Zoning Pilot Program, flanked by government logos and a small forest of regulatory terms. If you've ever sat through a hearing, you know when a document has the right costume. Due process fonts, citations lined up like chessmen, paragraphs dense enough to flatten doubt. It looked official enough to fool anyone who wanted to believe in programs and partnerships and the noble weight of government language. "This is a state-mandated emergency shelter initiative," Darlene continued, confident and urgent, as if she were trying to beat a clock that neither of us could see. "Your property qualifies for elder care placement under federal regulations that prioritize humanitarian assistance during housing crises." She gestured at a blanket box in the back of her van, like a stagehand cueing the next scene. "My parents need immediate housing assistance due to their medical situation and limited income options. The neighbors have already provided silent consent through our community notification system." The move was clean. Create urgency, rapid and moral authority, and frame any refusal as heartlessness. I've seen it before on camera. Executives who make layoffs sound like compassion, operatives who call pressure patriotism, pastors who rebrand control as care. It's a script. It works because people want to be good. I scanned the code. The form loaded correctly. The wording had the right rhythm. The legal references were in the right ballpark. The bureaucratic complexity was believable, and yet the moment itself felt staged. The van blocking the camera, the sunset slicing the valley for visual drama, the demand for immediate consent, the premise that silence equals yes. My documentary instinct, the one that hums when something's wrong with a picture, kept getting louder. I raised my camera, because that's what I do when the story starts moving. I filmed the license plate, the QR code, her badge, the decals on the van, the blanket box. I kept my voice level. I'll need to research this thoroughly before making any decisions. I told her, government partnerships require verification through proper channels. I always confirm authority before agreeing to property use changes. Her smile flickered, a micro-expression, over in a blink, then came back hot, glued to polite. Of course, she said, and in the same breath, remember, silence equals consent within 24 hours according to community standards and state emergency regulations. We can't delay elder care placement for bureaucratic verification. She left the box and a trail of dust. The glare evaporated once the headlights were gone. The cameras clicked back to seeing. The box sat like a prop you don't know whether to move or leave alone. That night, I did the thing I tell young filmmakers to do when their gut and the scene don't agree. I preserved evidence like it was gold. I uploaded everything to a secure server and mirrored it. I tagged footage with metadata and stitched the timeline so tight a prosecutor would nod. Preparation isn't paranoia. It's how you make sure truth can stand in a room where everyone else has a microphone. Sleep didn't come easy. What if it was real? What if I turned down legitimate elder care and became that guy in a viral video? The one who hates old people, the heartless homeowner. It's not a hypothetical when your work lives in public. Reputation is a house. 2, it needs guarding, but the pitch had cracks. Real programs are slow and dull. They drag you through paperwork and verifications and signatures and approvals. They don't arrive at golden hour with a QR code and a clock you didn't set. In the morning, I did what every homeowner should do when someone shows up with something that sounds like law. I drove to where actual law lives. The county office smells like toner and patience. I forwarded the form to the clerk at the counter. She called a supervisor. They huddled over the screen and frowned. 10 minutes later, they came back with a verdict. The domain hosting that form traced to a personal Gmail account created 3 weeks earlier. Not a .gov server. Not a state domain. A casual email address in a trench coat. It got worse with the form. The file properties included an internal name that wouldn't pass first round in a real agency. Draft_Karen_final_version 2. The timestamp showed edits at odd hours on weekends. The language evolved across versions, growing more official as someone iterated. Common in real work, but the combination here with private hosting and amateur versioning told a story of theater, not policy. The silent consent trick was the part that made me angriest. It allowed 24 hours for homeowners to say no, then turned silence into permanent agreement. No signatures, no oversight, no due process. Coercion dressed as convenience. I've filmed hurricanes. I've shadowed wild and fire crews. Legitimate emergency management doesn't trick people into surrendering property rights. It gets written permission, coordinates jurisdiction, and documents the chain of responsibility. Property rights do not evaporate because a clock runs out. I called the county planning office. No compassion zoning pilot program in their system. The clerk checked the state database that captures every federal partnership that touches property. Nothing. She recommended I try the state emergency management office. Nothing there, either. The ranger station shook its head. If an official body had built this thing, it would have left a footprint. The silence meant one thing. Phantom. When I called the sheriff's office, I landed with Deputy Grant Dawson, a listener with a cop's memory for detail, and a prosecutor's appreciation for evidence. Government impersonation is a federal crime, he said after I laid it out. HOAs have zero authority to override property rights through state programs, whether those programs are real or fake. Claiming government partnership to access property is criminal deceit. He took my complaint and opened a preliminary investigation. Now, the form read like a map into felony territory. Build fake authority. Fabricate jurisdiction. Pressure decent people to act ethically without checking. I spent the afternoon reading up on HOA limits, so I could hear the walls in the dark. HOAs can enforce architectural guidelines under recorded covenants. They can collect assessments. They can fine within the scope of their bylaws. They cannot invent government partnerships. They cannot create emergency management authority. They cannot override easements or property rights without legitimate agency authorization. All of it, every claim Darlene made, was outside HOA authority and well beyond constitutional guardrails. If she was impersonating state authority, she was tap dancing on a federal line, labeled wire fraud and government impersonation. The banner made it official in the kind of way that gets the wrong kind of attention. I woke to find my gate dressed like an agency press event. Bold vinyl proclaiming state compassion zone. The typography close enough to fool anyone driving by. Someone had trespassed in the night and hung a lie so polished it looked like law. If you worked around real programs, you learned their texture. They're boring in all the right ways. This was pageantry. My time-lapse camera had seen the night. It showed boot prints forming in damp soil, a shoulder brushing the gate, fresh scratches where hooks bit metal, then a figure in work gloves moving with the smooth economy of someone who has rehearsed their route. The gloves caught infrared light and gave up a secret. Paint smeared across the fabric, turquoise with white speckles, a pattern like a fingerprint. The lumber was a different kind of warning. It appeared beside my electrical meter, like a trap waiting for a spark. Stacked two close to live connections, arranged for maximum hazard. It wasn't the kind of mess a wind gust makes. It was sabotage dressed as carelessness. The fire department arrived almost before the dust settled. That wasn't luck. Someone had phoned in a tip, designed to summon uniforms as the scene said itself. The fire-wise inspector circled the lumber like a bloodhound around a scent cone. No accident put this here, he said after photographing angles and distances. This was arranged to create fire risk and force violations. You need to report this for a criminal investigation. He had a name for it, harassment tactic. It triggers insurance chaos and draws county scrutiny. The report he wrote became more than a piece of paper. It was proof that someone was trying to break my homeowner insurance by creating a story for adjusters and county code to chase. Insurance harassment is a slow knife. You don't always feel it until you check your policy and find holes where coverage used to be. Deputy Grant came within the hour, urgency in the way he moved as he watched the time lapse. Tampering. False calls. Banners pretending to be law. This is beyond nuisance, he said while bagging paint flake samples for forensic comparison. Harassment climbing toward felonies. He was careful with language because careful language holds in court. I sat in the dark that night, watching weeks of footage with the attention I usually save for editing rooms and evidence logs. The same paint-stained gloves popped up after midnight on 3 separate occasions. Hands removed survey stakes marking official boundaries. Hands relocated drainage markers set by county engineers. Hands moved materials to create the appearance of violations. Small acts that add up to big problems when the county starts writing letters. This wasn't random vandalism. This was targeted financial warfare, organized crime in mountain clothes. The next play Darlene ran was bolder, as cons often are when they feel the net tightening. She arrived with a man in a reflective vest who carried folders thick with stamped pages. Props meant to intimidate. Emergency elder access override standard drainage rules under new provisions, she declared, ignoring me to make it sound like she was speaking to a camera. Our compliance measures outrank county planning when humanitarian crises are declared. It took all of 2 minutes to dismantle. I dialed county planning, put the call on speaker, and asked Janice Miller to clarify water law. Janice has 2 decades of keeping slopes where they belong and houses dry. HOAs have no power to override county planning, she said without an extra word. Water easements sit under county law and state constitutions. No local association outranks hydrology and statute. She promised written confirmation for my files and any case that might come. I showed her something else, A winter reel of the access route Darlene wanted, frozen over in sheets of silver. Each thaw, each freeze, the footage turned it into a chessboard hazard. Cross there carrying any weight, and you're betting against physics. Liability isn't just a word when you can see where someone would fall. This isn't about access for care, Janice said. It's about shifting liability onto you. Your homeowner insurance wouldn't protect you from injuries on unauthorized access. The phone call that got me to sit down was from Rick Dalton, my real estate agent. Calm by nature, unflappable by experience. He sounded rattled. Noah, we have a serious issue. The access code to your lockbox was visible in a cabinet reflection in the virtual tour. It's legible, for numbers clear enough for anyone watching to note. Did you change the system code after closing? I pulled up the tour and enhanced the reflection. There was a yellow sticky note stuck to a backsplash with 2,347 written in marker. High resolution turns kitchens into maps. Someone could have paused, zoomed, and taken my doors for granted. The network logs told the rest of the story. An iPhone labeled M. Pierce had paired with my internal Wi-Fi multiple times in the last week during hours I wasn't home. Device connections to my camera network. Attempts at interface with a smart thermostat. A brief handshake with a personal drive. There are words for that. Criminal trespass. Breaking and entering. Invasion of privacy. The evidence made me angrier than any banner ever could. Someone had stood where I sleep and watched me through my own system. I documented it the only way I know how. Chain of custody. Timestamps. Device signatures. Logs stapled to logs. If you think documenting is for movies, you haven't been sued. Proof is a habit. The bigger picture snapped into focus once you laid the parts side by side. Claim government authority. Fake jurisdiction. Manufacture a humanitarian crisis. Then use a stolen code, enter, scout, and build leverage. That's organized deceit. Government impersonation. Wire fraud. Criminal trespass. Insurance harassment. It's a long staircase, but you can see the landing. I stopped thinking of myself as an isolated homeowner and started thinking like a neighbor. I built an information kiosk at the trailhead, the place everyone passes on their way to the ridge. Years in public education through film taught me to lay out a complicated story so people can walk through it and see how the parts connect. I printed frames from the time lapse, screenshot of the fake form metadata, copies of county statements, and a simple timeline. No accusations, just a record. I added Deputy Grant's contact information and step-by-step instructions on how to report government impersonation and property crimes. Community education is stronger than rumor. It's also safer than vigilante justice. People stopped. Hikers poured coffee from their flasks and read everything like it was a trail map. Neighbors nodded as pieces clicked. Conversations formed under the pines and rolled. Then the stories came, slow at first, then steady. She showed us the program. 2. An elderly hiker said with anger settling into his shoulders. We thought it was legitimate. 3 volunteers from the mountain cleanup program confessed something harder than embarrassment. Darlene had recruited them into what she called a state partnership. She gave them fake badges. She held training sessions with printed materials and forged insignia. She told them they were doing official government work. She'd turned generous people into her eyes and ears. They collected schedules. They noted security patterns. They observed property conditions, convinced they were helping with emergency planning. None of them recognized it as community surveillance for a private con. They were victims. They wanted justice. Information moves better in a network than alone. I set up a discreet channel for residents to share what they saw without tipping off anyone still watching us. Hikers reported unfamiliar vehicles parked at odd hours. A neighbor across the ravine documented another banner at an empty property, along with a printout of the same QR code. A retired teacher brought a photo of a reflective vest from a training day where volunteers were told to evaluate houses for state readiness. Pattern recognition turned individual experiences into a map of coordinated deceit. This wasn't neighborhood drama. This was organized crime dressed in community service. When residents had enough, they asked for a meeting. We gathered at the trailhead in the cool morning, 23 neighbors, 3 deceived volunteers, Deputy Grant, and Janice from planning. No shouting. No pitchforks. Clarity. Law. A community meeting can boil or focus. This one focused. The deputy broke down criminal versus civil, what constitutes government impersonation, wire fraud, and how coordinated scams cross jurisdictions and become organized crime. Janice explained how county law interfaces with easements and why HOAs cannot touch water authority. People asked better questions once they knew what walls were. Then an older couple stepped into the circle, faces pale and drawn, Darlene's parents. They looked lost and humiliated by a story they hadn't written. We never authorized any government programs. The father said, firm and clear, we never asked for emergency placement or consented to anything in our names. We would never approve this. His wife added the part that made everyone sway a little. Our daughter told us she was helping this community through official channels. We had no idea about trespass, false reports, or harassment. We believed she was acting with legitimate authority. Elder abuse isn't always bruises. Sometimes it's stealing your parents' names for a con. Their statement added a new charge to an already heavy file. Identity misuse for criminal ends. It also humanized the harm. Criminal behavior had crawled through family ties to dress itself as duty. The HOA board held an emergency session that afternoon. No bravado this time, only fear. They voted to remove Darlene from all roles. They referred the matter to law enforcement with a promise to cooperate. It was late, but necessary. Self-governance has a duty to hold its own accountable. If it won't, the state will. Within 2 weeks, multiple agencies were working the case. The evidence package, digital forensics, video, witness statements, logs, pain analysis, moved across desks with the kind of speed that tells you hit law. Federal prosecutors took government impersonation and wire fraud. State prosecutors took property crimes and harassment. The county handled false reporting and resource abuse. The county attorney told me something I'll never forget. Your documentation is documentary grade. Chain of custody, authenticated timestamps, verified statements. That level of discipline makes cases land hard. Digging through county records revealed a mess. 3 separate false emergency reports associated with my property in 2 weeks. None of the violations existed, but each report triggered an official response. Fire inspections, code visits, emergency assessments. Real people with real jobs forced to chase staged risks. Resource abuse is not a small thing. It steals from real emergencies and wastes taxpayer money. That's not only unethical, it's illegal. We gathered again for accountability after the charges were filed. The anger that had once felt like a wildfire had cooled into something better, resolve. People wanted justice, not drama. They wanted reforms, not grudges. The HOA adopted verification protocols that require any claimed government program to be authenticated through county and state agencies before anyone acts. They added oversight to ensure one person can't commandeer compliant authority and start writing their own law into the minutes. Workshops went up at the community center. Property rights, how to verify authority, how to spot forged documents, how to report scams. The county issued public warnings about the limits of HOA power and practical scam recognition. Federal involvement grew as similar patterns showed up in neighboring mountain communities. The same fonts, the same QR, the same silent consent trick, the same reflective vestiator. Organized crime rarely confines itself to one ridge line. 18 months later, the case concluded, guilty on all counts in both federal and state courts. Government impersonation and wire fraud earned federal time. Criminal trespass, harassment, and property crimes earned state sentences. False reporting and resource abuse earned county penalties and restitution. It didn't feel like a victory parade. Justice isn't confetti. It's paperwork and accountability and the quiet relief that comes when a bad story ends where it should. The restitution covered the measurable harm. Security upgrades, legal fees for consultation and victim protection, contractor delays tied to harassment, increased insurance costs from the attempted hazard creation, and lost time on a renovation timeline that had been turned into a map of interference. Money doesn't return sleep or erase the knowledge that someone stood in your study, but it helps you fix what criminals broke. The volunteer groups reorganize with verification procedures and agency partnerships that actually exist. Their work continues. Trail clearing, elder outreach, fire preparedness, but with authentication that protects both them and the people they serve. They learn the same lesson I did. Good intentions need guardrails. I finished the renovation with neighbors who had become allies. A retired electrician helped me trace lines under the house. A couple from 3 drives up came by with coffee the day we finished installing a new foundation beam. Hikers who once walked past my gate without knowing me now slowed down to wave or point out a coyote on the ridge. The mountain hasn't changed. It's the same slope of green and granite. But the people on it are different because they learned to tell the difference between law and theater. The gate that once wore a lie now does what a gate should. It marks the boundary where responsibility meets respect. The cameras don't blink. The logs run quietly in the background. If anyone asks to use my property for a program, I ask to see paperwork logged on government servers and verified by county hands. If something smells like a QR code and urgency, I assume it's a trick until an actual official confirms it isn't. That isn't cynicism. It's homeowner rights executed with due diligence. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Property rights are not just 4 lines on a map. They're part of how a community understands itself. When someone uses fake government authority to try to take what isn't theirs, it damages more than one address. It erodes trust. It makes decent people doubt themselves. The way back isn't to fight dirty. It's to document cleanly, verify through real channels, and hold liars accountable through the courts. I still make documentaries. The difference is I use those skills to protect my home and my neighbors as much as I use them to tell stories. A camera can be a witness when memory gets loud and facts get lost. A timeline can be a shield when a con man tries to turn confusion into consent. Evidence is a kind of light. It turns shadows back into objects. It helped the mountain community rebuild itself on truth. When the sun comes up now, the valley looks the way it always did. Quiet, steady, sane. The difference lives in how we talk to each other at the trailhead, how we read forms that say pilot program, how we call the county before we let anyone hang a banner on a gate. We learn the value of a phone call to planning, an email to emergency management, a report to a deputy who knows the law as more than a threat. We learn what HOA abuse looks like and where the authority ends. We learn to spot a government impersonation scam as quickly as a coyote in the snow. We learn to build community watchdog habits without turning into a mob. If you've listened this far, I'd like to hear what you would have done in my place. Would you have scanned a code and gone inside? Would you have driven to the county office? Would you have hung a sign at the trailhead or stayed quiet and hoped it passed? I'll read your thoughts the way I read footage, carefully, with respect for what they reveal. If this story made you feel something or taught you how to protect your own place, let me know. Leave a kind word for the neighbors who showed up and the volunteers who refused to be used again. Share this with someone who loves a good plot twist where the good guys win because they did the work. Evidence, law, patience. Subscribe if you want more stories about property rights, homeowner protections, and the kinds of mountain community challenges that test who we are. Until next time, guard your gates, trust your instincts, and never let anyone, no matter how official they sound, write your story for you.